Random. We are live. And Derek's overdressed. He just came back from court.
No, there's no in-person things anymore, and so
Yeah.
I want to. You know what I mean? I made my tea. I've got my gear on, and I've got a nice jacket on. I want to look nice for people.
Don't set the bar too high.
I have a brand here. You know what I mean? And one element of my brand is hotness and style and fashion.
You should use that on your videos as well.
I've been tired lately while I make my videos.
At least you make videos on like Dan.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's not a kind of spiral situation where
once you stop, it's hard to get back.
Yeah, and also I actually filmed a Zoom conversation with Sean Mooney, from Sean the Book Maniac channel, and he's like, "Oh, do you want to edit this one?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll get around to it." I've had that for like, so you know.
Was that breast and eggs?
What's that?
Was that breast and eggs? Was that the conversation you guys had?
We talked about that a little bit, I think, but it was just more general stuff.
Okay.
Kind of like what you've been reading. We dug into each other's sordid sexual pasts, and there's lots of juicy meat waiting there. I just gotta get around.
At least that's
you just gotta edit out.
Oh no. I'm gonna test YouTube. Shameless.
Just leave Sean's juicy stuff in there and edit yours out.
I will say he showed me his large phallic statue that he had like the carve. Yeah, I'm building up hype now, so it's in public.
I love the idea of the editing out. Like if like every time you go to speak, there's your voiceover just saying, "My first kiss was my husband." You know, like, I never think of other people.
No, I have to meet him and raise the bar further. It's my goal, but it came up. I don't know if we were gonna talk about like bad stuff we read this year too, but like this was the year that I finally accepted that Cox cannot sustain an entire like novel length narrative. It's not a lucky premise for me this year.
But breasts were fine.
I mean, no, they're great. They did. She's that very book is on my little list, but
I assumed it was. It was on my list, but I thought, you'll cover it.
Yeah, you know, I got my eyes on that Mieko Kawakami, but Sean and I read a book together called The Collection by this French author. Her name's escaping me, as is the translator. But it was all about this woman who had like lots of sexual experiences, like with anonymous strangers, and she was building this memory palace of all the penises that she had, men she had hooked up with, and that was like her whole.
She was collecting mushrooms.
It sounded right.
A cover full of mushrooms, yeah.
Yeah, it sounded like I mean, who wouldn't love that? Especially now, I would be hanging out my penis palace like all the time, but it just could not keep up like a novel's worth of entertainment. And then I'm nearing the end, Derek, and maybe you've read this too, Michael. The Vengeance is Mine, All Others Must Pay Cash by Eka Kerwinian. I know I'm pronouncing that wrong, and I also don't know the translation. But anyway, man, if thoughts and prayers were a real thing, then that guy's dick would be like working nonstop, because it is mentioned by every character on like every other page, like their concern for his penis and how he can't get an erection. It is just like, and
He talked
Yeah.
about his problems to everyone, it seemed. Everyone knew.
That was the funny part to me. What didn't work for the book for me was that the ultimate reveal on why he is this way was too like rote. I thought like it was psychology 101-ish type feel to me, like, and so much of the other elements of the book were really like out there and interesting, and then all of a sudden I'm not like, I mean, he had trauma obviously, but it was like in the context of all the other crazy shit that went on, they didn't sell the trauma to me in a way to where I was like, really, so I didn't like that book. I mean, you started off saying books we didn't like. I probably read more books I didn't like this year than any other year. I mean, that's my own fault. It's not like,
Blame 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like I tried
Sorry,
Nabokov pen or whatever. I know I always say it wrong. Nabokov.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I tried pen and I hated it. Like, for instance, you know what I mean? Like, Michael and me both weren't too much into the John Fosse, the other name, which I thought I would, devour. Anyway. Yeah.
I feel like it was the wrong time to read Fosse because you had the president doing stream of conscious speaking at his. Didn't need more stream of conscious books.
See, that really never, until you said something, that didn't catch me that way. And it still honestly didn't, only because, well, I don't know, it just didn't. But what didn't get me through it at all is that it was so boring. I mean, and I got to have something, you know what I mean, to like cling in on. And it was just so, his interior dialogue, I mean, his interior monologue to me was way more boring than mine is. I don't know about like.
You don't think about houses and parks all day
No,
long?
what it is I don't like ruminate on every tiny decision for 5 pages. Like literally about like, should I drive here or here? Is 5 pages. You know what I mean? Like of just like, no. Anyway, we're not here to.
Is there like a plot to that book, or is it really just kind of?
There is but there's a setup. The setup is good, I think. The setup is there's 2 people with identical names, okay? And they're both painters. One of them got sober years before and is successful, like he has a gallery that sells his stuff, okay? And he lives kind of like, he goes into the city every now and then, but mostly he lives like out in the country with one sort of eccentric neighbor, okay? And he's in the first part of the narration going to see the guy with the other name, his same name, who was also a painter, but is an alcoholic beyond, I mean, it's one of the probably darkest alcoholism depictions I've read in books, like Shane, what's his name from the Pogues, having to wake up and drink vodka in the morning just to be able to like wake up. Like it was really, really bad. So I will admit that having been sober from booze, at least for 9 years, some of those descriptions, while good, were a little bothersome. And that's not the fault of whatever. But anyway, but that's the setup. Michael's right that there's no plot. Like there's a setup, and then you're within those thoughts of those 2 people, but you're not like pacing toward anything. They both kind of feel like they're at the end of their life too. Like I'm not going to read the second. There's a second one, and I think it's the last one. But anyway, I mean, I think we're at the end of their life too. So there's like, it's a lot of looking backward as opposed to forward or present.
Well, that's a lot more than I knew about that book before. It felt like one of those ones that has the most like, it's like this author is important and he's doing interesting things, and nothing else about the book. It's just like kind of there's like a mysterious allure to it almost. But it sounds like it didn't.
I feel like I need to try. Yeah. Maybe try another one, but I don't know. The that one's worth it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that in general, I mean, it's not like there's a lack of, white male European authors. You know what I mean? Like, that's not where my reading lacks. So I think I'm more likely to try, like, as opposed to going into another one of his books, like, I think I'd rather try from either a country I haven't read before or very often, you know what I mean? Or like, some perspective or whatever that, it's just a little bit different. Like, I kind of get the vibe of what his deal is. Anyway.
Yeah. I think I kind of ended up feeling this similar about Thomas Bernhard after I finished The Woodcutters, but I don't want to get too dragged down into the mire of negativity. We're here to be positive.
Yeah,
I what you mean. It's like you kind of give those guys one chance. And yeah, novels can be like very different from one another, and maybe that just wasn't the right one for you. But I kind of see I sympathize with that instinct. Like, I'm not gonna immediately or maybe ever go back to Thomas Bernhard. Like, it was the one shot, and it just wasn't enough.
I haven't tried him yet, but as I said before, my prizes is going to be the one I want to try.
Yeah, yeah.
Some smack talking.
It is interesting how, like, what your entry into an author that has a lot of work, how much that colors your eventual, like, long-term view, of the author. For positive and for negative. As much as I love Bolaño, for instance, I mean, there's plenty that if I had read that first and started off, I wonder if I would have been like, I'm in no rush, you know what I mean? Because there's so much work, and there's plenty of it that's minor work, and then one of mine tonight that I'll talk about, I think it's that I started with like such a perfect one, that it sealed the deal for me. So what?
You like Bolaño? You've never mentioned that before.
I know. I probably should. I probably should talk about that some.
It does. Actually, I read my first Bolaño that was just kind of like meh to me this year as well. And I think there is like, it builds some faith or like some goodwill when that first experience is like, so it seems excessive, but also like, oh, they're really like pulling something off here. And then you can go into their more, minor works or other stuff and be like, maybe they tried that before and it totally didn't work. I could see that happening because I can't believe it actually worked that one time. But
is it one of the ones he didn't want published?
I don't know. I don't think so. This is the third,
because
right?
There's a heap of those. Third Reich, yeah. I think that's what he wanted.
Yeah, I love that book.
They keep releasing all those books that he didn't want published. It must be frustrating.
Gotta get
when I was a teenager in early 20s, there used to be all that buzz around J.D. Salinger. As soon as he dies, he has like 10 unpublished books ready to go. Do y'all remember that at all? I mean, I wasn't even like, I read Catch on the Ride the time that you do, and a couple of short stories. It never was a thing for me that seriously, but I was always very attracted to the mystery of the author and the man himself. And of course he died. We're many years later and there's nothing, like, I think he really was in the woods doing yoga, being with increasingly younger women. Like, that's all he was doing.
We believe the facts that have been presented.
Yeah.
He was an attractive man. Is that what you're trying to say?
Unlike
Michael,
Thomas Pynchon.
Neither confirm nor deny. No one knows. I think Michael should go first about one that he really liked.
One that I really liked. Well, I think the favorite of mine was Kim Jong, born 1982. I don't know if either of you read that. As Chu Ba Chu, and translated from the Korean by Jamie Chang. I think it's a book men should read, not women. because it's like going through the everyday sexism of a woman. Like Kim Jong in 1982 is probably one of the most popular names given to women. So it's like telling the story of this woman and just all the shit she had to go through throughout her life and all the sexism she had to deal with. And it was like just everyday sexism stuff. Like when she's in primary school, she gets picked on by a boy because he has a crush on her, and like she's bawling and crying, and the teacher's going, "Oh, it's just because he likes you. Let it go." Yeah, so the whole book's about that, and just all that kind of struggle, which, like, I'm lucky I don't have that struggle, but it's interesting to read that and see what they have to go through.
Does it follow her through like a specific period of her life?
No, just throughout her whole, like, up until she becomes a mother, like pressured into giving birth and getting married and all those kind of things, and the and in the pay gap when she gets a job and stuff like that. So it's kind of dealing with a lot of those issues and just how much she has to put up with because she's a woman.
So, in your experience, have the women that you've talked to about this book not liked it because they felt like it's an obvious thing, sort of?
There's a few women that I've talked to say that I don't need to read this because I've experienced this in my life.
Right.
I don't want to experience that on my pages.
That's interesting.
So there was a lot of that. That's why I say men should read it, just so they get a kind of idea. It's a short book, but there's a lot of shit. you probably know.
Like the mundane suffering is kind of like, if you've been through it yourself, if you maybe want to see a little something. But the experience as like a narrative can be valuable as well.
Like I finished the book and then restarted it again with my wife just as an audiobook, just because I was curious to see her reactions to it and how she responded to it.
I did that. That same one, right?
Oh, okay. And what did she?
Well, there's a podcast episode where we talk about it, but she enjoyed it more than other women have, but she was kind of going into it aware that people were upset because this is life experience. So she kind of had that feeling of this is what to expect. This is going to be difficult to hear sometimes.
Yeah, she was like well primed for it.
Ready to suffer.
All right, Dan.
Which of most of the books I pick are suffering.
Of course they are. Of course.
I'm waiting for your book, Derek, where we read about your suffering.
Soon. The suffering of, whatever.
White middle-aged guy.
Exactly. Like completely.
It's never been done before.
All right, the entire world is set up for me to succeed, but let me go.
Well, we will look forward to it in 2022. Is that when it's coming in?
We'll see.
We're being optimistic. You've been. I've seen a lot of output from you, Derek, on the Twitters. It's very cool. It seems like you picked up a lot of pace in terms of stuff you've been submitting for publication.
Yeah, I mean, once I decided to do it, that was the biggest hang up, and then, I mean, I've mentioned this recently, but the only thing I kind of think back on is, should I have done a different Twitter account with not my real name, because like I am employed and stuff, like, you know what I mean? And not everything I write is necessarily like, here, boss. But also like, it felt like a little bit of like pulling the rug under with people that like wanted to follow me, because I used to like only talk about translated literature, you know, only. And then all of a sudden it was like, here's the thing they wrote, here's the thing they wrote. But the nice thing is, I realize is that you care, and by you I mean like me or whoever, so much more, or think so much more about that stuff than other people do. Like, you know what I mean? Like, just be your damn self, whatever it is, and you know what I mean? Like, it was just whatever, like, you know. And so I think it's fine, but it is a little weird in some ways that like there's like this crossover thing. But it is all the same thing. It's all literature, you know. Like, it's just I've always looked at books from a technical and a craft side. Like, that's always the stuff that I loved, you know, was the words, the language. One of the things I used to say about translated literature that I loved so much was that you had two artists working together to give you this product. You know what I mean? Like, and so sometimes there would be like, people have said Stefan Zweig, for instance, it does not read well in his own language. Like, that the books are kind of like, just don't sound great. So like, he's got good stories, but he's not like Kafka in German or something where it's like, you know, he's brilliant wordsmith. But I can never know that. I never will know that. You know what I mean? And so like, because you get this other artist's interpretation of something on top of it. And I always really, really liked that. And it helped my writing because I was reading so much stuff that was filtered through, right? So, you know, that whole thing about like, I don't want to read this because I'm trying to work on something like this. So I don't want to be like influenced. Well, it's hard to be influenced when something's being translated. Like, who am I influenced by? But anyway.
Two thoughts here. One, did you not change your name because Big Bruiser Dope Boy was already taken?
Absolutely, yeah. You know,
and the other one was... Yeah. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, I don't have an answer. That is my answer.
The other one with translations, you know how they say, read what you want to write. How do you do that if you read translations all the time?
Yeah, I mean, one, I think I don't get in the language too much of a certain writer, which has been a thing in the past that has really screwed me up. You know, like, especially, I don't think it would anymore because I'm older and because I've done it consistently for years now, even though I haven't submitted stuff. But I mean, I remember at 22, 23, when I first started Infinite Jest, like, definitely my short stories just sounded like those characters, you know. I mean, and so for one thing, that's kind of, again, the nice thing is that like you're getting it, you're not taking any of that. But the bigger reason, or the bigger thing that helps, is stories from around the world just tell different stories, you know, and there is a limit, you know, to American fiction and to the stories they are going to tell, because we are a very specific kind of shitty empire. You know what I mean? And so there is sort of you know, yeah. I mean, you can do it. So I really, really like. I mean, some of my favorite. I mean, that's why I liked that Nona Fernandez. Was that who did Space Invaders last year that we both really liked, Michael? Like, is that like, I didn't know anything about the government of that, and I end up then like through a Wikipedia rabbit hole, like, you know, looking up all the atrocities, you know, and you know, whatever, you know. So anyway, so I think that is that there's just different stories, and I'm really attracted to like the story part. But I mean, I've got, of my 5 books, I did pick one non-translated title. Like, I am reading more, you know, non-translated.
Yeah. Rude.
The brand. The brand.
Okay.
I actually picked a non-translation, so.
Oh, you did? But is it in English? Is it in English or Australian?
American.
Okay, Dan, you have to go next. What's your first one?
Okay, I have to go next. I tried to only pick ones that I don't think we've discussed much in the past. And this is one that I read earlier on this year. You may have heard of its Metamorphoses. Translated by this is the only I was telling Michael before this that this one's translated by David Rayburn. I was telling Michael before why I'm not prepared. I was like, I was gonna pull all the physical books off my shelf, and I was scurrying around and gave up. But I did find the Metamorphoses, which I don't know. Like, I've always been like when I was a kid, my dad used to like tell me like Greek and Norse myths as like bedtime stories. I got really into that.
That's cool.
And to terrify you?
Yeah,
look at
they're so much more exciting. I mean, come on, like Baby Shark. That's we all know. That's just a stepping stone to Hades gates and the
of course. You're yelling out for Heidi to come get you.
I mean, it's so like dramatic and tragic and funny, and I think that in terms of like books needing to give you like a little bit of something to hang on for and engage you and kind of entertain you to a certain extent, like this one was just like a really surprisingly I don't know how old it is. It's pretty old. This is my historical assessment. I'm a dumb guy. I don't know how history works, and I didn't look it up beforehand. But anyway, it's like a pretty old book, but like because it's not like committed to any particular subject matter beyond transformation, or like style. There are these parts that are like just straight up read like a horror story. Like there's this whole sequence where people are dissing what's his name, Dionysus, because he's like the youngest of the gods, and he's kind of one of Zeus's many illegitimate children, and not do proper respect, and like Dionysus's like feasts of all of his followers is like nearing this village, and it turns into this like horror story where like revelers rip the unbelievers limb from limb. And then there are just like these other funny and weird parts where like this guy is Zeus and Hera. These are the Greek names, not the Roman names, so I'm sure Ovid would not approve, but I tracked so many of these things. And anyway, they're arguing about whether like men or women have more pleasure during sex. And they're like, hey, let's call on Tiresias, I think it is, like a famous seer of Greek legend. And he's like, because he like transformed into a woman for 7 years because he was like going down a forest path and he saw two snakes banging and he hit him with a stick, and then he turned into a woman. And so he had many sexual experiences on both sides, and he's like, yep, women win. They got it the best. So you heard it here first. And then he was like, but this is like the origin story for the guy who was like in Oedipus Rex, like the seer who foretold all of the bad shit that was going down, the blind man, and all the fucked up family drama that was happening in that play. Like his origin story is like, I can see the future because I did a bunch of weird snake sex stuff. So it's kind of all over the place. It's like super entertaining, and it's kind of that's what I needed at the time I was reading it too. It just something to kind of like not that it's not deep and it has like lots of like social commentary. Like you realize how fucked up all of like the most famous Greek heroes were. They did tons of like disgusting, morally disgusting acts, and it's a part of their mythology. But the only stories that we typically hear are like their great deeds. But then there's like this whole sequence where this man will not praise Hercules because he was like in battle with Hercules, and Hercules is a pretty fucked up guy. So there's like calling out the toxic male anti-hero. way back when.
That's fascinating.
It's really fun. I highly recommend.
I've never read it. It's like that's a big hole but I've never read it.
I tried starting another epic poem afterwards. I think it was the Odyssey. No, the Aeneid. And I thought like it would be the same. It's not the same. I think Ovid is kind of like following up after a lot of the people that laid the groundwork and doing his own kind of like take on the mythology. The more classical stuff doesn't excite me as much as this managed to. The impression I have is that it was like unique even amongst similar texts, but I might be wrong.
Well, I mean, it's interesting anything that survives cultural importance for that long. Do you know what I mean? I mean, that's in and of itself like incredible, or at least you know what I mean. Like, yeah.
Actually, he ends the whole book saying like, "And now that you've read this story, I will be the name that lives on forever." Like, even past I was like, "Damn, that's like a sweet flex to like drop at the end," because you kind of think he turns around. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
He's the last portion of the book is all about how basically the Roman Empire is, the inheritor of all of the Greek heroes and mythology and the power of the gods. And there's this whole thing where they bring Apollo over in the form of like a golden cobra or some shit over from like a Greek temple into Rome. And he's like now blessing them with their power. And he's like talking about how like Julius Caesar was, also born of the gods and blah, blah, blah. And it was like, oh, this is becoming like some like pro-empire propaganda at the end. But then at the end, he was like, actually, I Ovid are like, am the true hero of this tale. Mic drop.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's good to see that writers definitely have not changed. You know what I mean?
Yeah. he had some swagger at the end, but I think that it was justified swagger based on what he pulled off.
All right, are you guys going in any order, or are you just pulling them?
Just picking random ones.
All right. So I'm going to go with this one, which is Marie Ingai's That Time of Year, translated by Jordan Stump, and that's 2 lines press. It's really thin volume. It was the first of hers I read. And Dan, you were talking about like the time that you read something, like needing something at a time. This I read right when it came out, like at the end of summer going into the fall, and that was a big shift here in this country in terms of it's starting to feel like we were gearing up towards a long and difficult 6 months or whatever. An election was coming up in 2 months that was driving everybody crazy, and then like the brief respite from COVID numbers kind of we knew was going to be gone. So anyway, this story is a family that goes on vacation, like a French family, and the dad, they stay like 1 day later than they normally do into September. And so it was really interesting reading it like during that time as the season's going to change, because it's a tourist town that like you're not supposed to stay past that 1 day. And so it's just the man, he can't find his wife and kids, and then all of the sort of like mysteries of the village and the town and whatnot come out. I mean, it would be a great movie. It's a horror story, but written and obviously translated beautifully. The first one of hers, obviously that I'd read. But what I really liked about it is I am extremely sensitive to seasonal change. A week ago, I probably had the worst depressive episode I've had all year. You know what I mean? Because like we really here in North Carolina hit winter. We hit the dark at 4:45, 4:50 p.m. We hit the cold. And of course, we can't leave our houses or anything anyway. So this year's even a little bit worse. But like I'm just very attuned to it. And I loved the idea of this book where you're trying to stay in one season just a little too long and what that does to you psychologically. So That was a winner. Definitely a good book. And I got, actually, one of my favorite people on Twitter is Ron Restrepo. Do you guys follow him? He's in Texas, and he's like just a great reader. And so he likes her a lot. So he got me to get this one. So this is the next one I should read, which is My Heart Hemmed In. And I think that's going to be like my first read of the new year, because this is somebody who I could see myself reading everything. I love it.
It sounded really interesting when you were describing it. That's definitely one that's piqued my interest as well.
Yeah, it's plotted more so than a lot of the stuff that we read and talk about. Do you know what I mean? That's why I said the screenplay thing. It's very you're kind of like, oh, this is just, there's a lot of action and stuff going on. But anyway, it's good. Loved it.
Awesome.
I think I've read her, but I don't remember. Me?
Yes,
let's get this English book out of the way. Any guesses?
English books, American. I think it might be Antkind. I think it might have been enough to get in your top 5.
Which one?
Antkind.
Antkind. No, definitely not. Fleisman is in Trouble.
Oh.
By that Taffy Boris actor.
God, it's been a long year. I didn't realize that was this year for you, because you did a podcast on that, didn't you?
The podcast? My translation podcast on the American book.
Did you do a video on it? I definitely listened to you.
Yeah, I did
talk
do
about
a video.
But I didn't realize it was this year. That's crazy.
I think it was January or February this year. It's basically if how do you describe it? If Philip Roth wrote good books.
I like that.
Because it has that sort of style of this angsty man living in New York, complaining about his hard life. But then it flips to his ex-wife's perspective, and then you uncover everything that's going on from her side. And he's just an annoying man, just complaining about a struggle that's not really a struggle. He's just selfish and living in his own head. It was really interesting in that perspective, because there's so many books about men living lives in New York, and it was just interesting to see that, and then just turn it just to see what's actually happening from someone else's point of view.
Nice.
So it's really the ex-wife's perspective that made it better than the average.
Oh yeah, I really enjoyed it, because I like that intellectual living in New York kind of setting, but then when it flipped, it's like, oh, this just got heaps better.
Gotta stay tuned for the flip. So is it funny? Is it satirical kind of, or what's the tone of?
Think Philip Roth type thing, where he's just living his life, having his breakdowns and complaining about the world and his sex wife and trying to have sex with everyone that's standing and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's funny. It's entertaining. There's just there's a whole thing where he joins dating websites and trying to deal with all that when he's this 40 or 50-year-old man trying to understand this new way of dating. So, yeah, it's just, I just like that kind of book. I enjoy people complaining about life.
Relatable.
Yeah. I guess it was probably just the right time, right place. But I think, for an American book, it did well.
It had to break through like many layers of armor to earn that spot.
I've read a lot of crime this year because 2020, but most of that's been American.
They had a NYRB Books had a sale, and I know it was for Australia. It did not matter because Damien posted his cart, and I could not believe. I could not believe this shit. Like, unbelievable. But anyway, for here, it was a good deal, and I got the last 2 manchettes, and one of them was Ivy Pearl, which I know you've read, but I haven't, and I'm definitely excited about that. So I'll finish out that. The crime definitely helps me out when I'm in a rut.
I haven't read the Ivory Pearl.
Oh, you haven't? I thought you had. Oh, you've got it.
No, I bought it recently, sometime this year. I've only read 2, I think 2, yeah.
If you had to recommend one to read first of his, which
I don't know what Derek would say.
What did you say?
Nada?
If you had,
yeah, he's right. I think he's right, actually. Yeah. See, my favorite is 3 to Kill. Because it has, I think, like the most interesting setup of the ones I've read so far. And again, there's 2 I have it: Ivory Pearl, and then, well, the other one's not up here. But I think Nada probably is the best representation. Definitely the new one is not. The newest one is No Room at the Morgue, and it's his take on like American private eye stuff. It's great, but it's nothing like his other stuff because he doesn't do private eye detective stuff. He's going to hone in on either the criminal or, in a lot of cases, like the patsy, like, right? You know, like that's how 3 to Kill is, where it's like he's going to hone in on that, and then you're going to see that, in fact, you're complicit too, you know, because of course a lot of his stuff is completely anti-capitalist. I mean, that's why he is, I think, as loved and stuff as he is across different, not just as a noir writer, because there's more there. Like, he has definitely a political bent. But yeah, I think Michael's right about where to start.
Cool. Yeah, because of you two, I've been wanting to check him out, but you know, wasn't sure.
Turned you into a crime reader.
Yeah, I like it. Hey, I got you to read Generation Loss, which is kind of a crime story now.
Yeah, I do want to read more of her stuff. I like the idea of it from the photographer perspective.
Yeah, Elizabeth Hand, she's a talented writer. I finished the 4th one, Book of Lamps and Banners. It was like each of the books kind of like uses art to kind of dig back into the horrors of like some certain era of the past. And then in the newest one, the horror is the currently happening reality of like rampant white supremacy and like imminent pandemics. And you know, it got real in the newest one. But so one I wanted to mention too as a favorite of this year is called Free Day by Ines Cognati. The translator from French, I believe, is Liesl Schillinger. Liesl? And I actually got this book. It's an NYRB book, at least as it's available in America. And I entered some like online giveaway and actually won. So I got this book for free.
Oh.
And I was like, I kind of entered it because it has this really cool cover art there's a surrealist painter named Remedios Varo, who I always really liked her art. And they used her for the cover of this book, which is, you know, almost nothing to do with the actual story itself, but it looked really cool. I won it, and so I read it. And, you know, so the author herself where her family immigrated from a very poor region of Italy to live in the countryside of France, where there's like a very hard agricultural, it's not nice. It's not a nice place to live. It's hard to make things grow and to live any kind of good life. And there's an interesting introduction where the author basically, I guess, even at the end of her artistic career, having become a successful novelist in France, still said that she never felt that she was French because of this cultural divide she felt in her upbringing. And anyway, so like the book itself is set kind of in that same region, set of conditions where probably the author grew up. And I guess like my capsule review of this book is like, it's like if Holden Caulfield had like real shit to worry about. Like it's just, she's going to this kind of, very nice school, but she has to sort of live as a dormer there. She's sort of like the scholarship student, if you will. And her family still lives in the countryside, and so she rides these long, like multi-mile treks on some weekends to go see her family. But her family has all this sort of like crazy shit going on, lots of kids, not a lot of means to take care of them. And she's kind of the one that got out, has prospects for like a more successful conventional life, but her mother in particular is like very emotionally dependent on her and to help her just like take care of the practical day-to-day stuff. And it's kind of like this, it's not, and you hear that premise and you can think probably of like multiple other novels and movies that have like, going, I had a shot at success and I'm going back to my roots kind of thing. But it was way more like raw and like unpredictable than that. The protagonist was very like, she's authentically traumatized, and so she's doing well, but she's not like, she's doing well by like social standards in terms of like getting to pursue this educational opportunity and not living in like the material conditions that her family is living in. And at the same time, she's like deeply traumatized by all the things that have happened. She's sort of like approaching, even after this like long, harsh journey by bicycle to her family's house, like she's still just sort of like circling the property, and like these different like geographical features spark these like kind of memories of her, what she's experienced there. And it's like sort of like exploring this like physical and like psychological like territory. She's kind of like pushing the edges of it, probing around, trying not to like disturb things, and wondering maybe if she shouldn't have come back home at all. And it's like very nihilistic. So it has that like whole like people are fakes and phonies attitude, but it like really backs it up with like some real shit. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It was totally surprising. Had no expectations whatsoever going in. I was like, God damn, this is good stuff. So it got a lot of respect.
I just added it to my wish list.
Where do you do you use GoodReads for that?
Yeah, but I'm slowly converting to Storygraph. I have GoodReads.
I have never used one of those before, but I realized that I was basically depressed buying a few too many books during like lockdown or whatever, to where I had to, we had to have the sit down, about the like, hey, so I was like, oh, yeah, you know what I'll do is I'll start a wish list, but I don't want to mess with GoodReads, so maybe I'll try Storyboard.
Yeah, Storyboard is currently in beta. I think it gets released next month, and it is independently owned and run. So,
well, Amazon is too. Jeff Bezos is an independent. He's an independent guy.
Yeah.
Most importantly, the search function actually works on that. So GoodReads is the hilariously terrible search function ever.
And I think the good thing about Storygraph is it's not really based around community, so you can just keep it to yourself.
But like, if you chose to, could you see mine and I see yours?
Yeah,
if you chose?
Yeah, you can follow people, but it's not the primary function of it. So there is a tab where you can look at the people you follow and check out what they're doing, but it's like just a side tab you can look at.
Perfect. Yeah, I think I would like that, because I mean, one thing I do like about just like peeking at what somebody's thinking about reading is this was the first year that I really did buddy reads, and I liked it so much. Like, the Crime Pleasure one we did was great. Obviously, we landed on we ended on a sour note, but I think I want to do JR with with Dan next year if he's up for it and if he's going to do it. But it would be cool to be able to see your, either one of yours or both lists and be like, oh, I'm thinking about reading this, too. Do you want to, match up and do it or whatever,
Yeah. I sent you the link to the beta so you can join and just use it to track your reading. That's the main thing.
I will.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to do my American one.
Oh, before you do that, have you checked out their recommendations? Because they've got recommendation system in there on Storygraph, Dan.
Oh, sorry. What on Storygraph?
Storygraph has it tries to recommend you books, like your recommendations, and
I think
I'm actually surprised that the books they've recommended, like they're actually recommending books that I might actually read, like Mad Tiger by Ika Karawang. How do you say Karawang? That Indonesian writer.
Right. I haven't looked up the pronunciation for his name yet. But
I'm actually surprised that their recommendations are actually books that I'm actually interested in.
Really? Yeah. No, it's true. The recommendation function is it's tempting you over to the dark side. That speaks to its power. The algorithm is strong. I know. Yeah. I mean, it totally does. I feel like GoodReads is whatever its recommendation algorithm is. It's like very fringely correct, if that's a real statement you can make. But this, Storygraph is like, I've seen that mentioned before, and it sounded like something I would like. And based on whatever input I provided, like it's definitely seeming to confirm that.
The weirdest one I got was for Breasts and Eggs, where it recommended I read Lee Childs.
It's the next step.
I'm sure he knows how to write about breasts and eggs. All right. Go on, Derek.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. I had to pull out my fancy things because they died on me.
So,
now we're just
no longer yuppie.
I don't need recommendations anymore. Like Twitter, I have too many books to read. You know what I mean? Like,
I'll recommend you books.
I just bought some books that you all have recommended before. They've been sticking in my head, so you're getting you've reached me. I got 77 recently.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I have The Clerk here, his newest. And it's actually the first one of his that's like, or at least that Open Letter put out, that's short. I mean, it's, like a 1, maybe 2 sitting read. Another one that I'm saving because I'm pretty excited about.
I love the cover, the font, the wiggly font.
It's a great cover.
Yeah. All right, my American one is this right here, The Lost Scrapbook by Evan Dara. So I did a whole video on it, so I'm not going to go full thing into it because right now, like, I'm addicted to this. But let me just say what it is about this kind of writing that I really like is when somebody does something experimental and you're kind of like plopped down right from the beginning in a very unfamiliar place, like genre wise, plot wise, whatever. You just don't know what's going on. And for this one, it's how long is it? It's a 400-page book. So maybe about page 50 or 60, it's kind of bugging you a little bit that like you don't know what's going on. But then by page 100, you've forgotten because it's so funny. Like, and that's when experimental stuff really works for me, when it's funny, And then when it becomes an absolute masterpiece, I think, is that at the end it ties up enough to where you're like, oh, I understand everything that was kind of going on like now, and those experimental flourishes and kind of like things that you might initially think of as sort of showy writer things served a purpose in the story. And like, oh, you just found a really cool way to tell a story. So like this was written in 1995, and the first 3/4 of the book are like turning a radio dial between dialogue almost. So you just kind of step in and out between, but you can't tell, like, am I just overhearing this? Like, what's the cohesion kind of thing? And then that last quarter, it all comes together. Like, and so anyway, it was really great. And he lives in Paris. Evan Dara does. And no one knows who he is. That's just a pseudonym. And this book like won an award that William Volman judged, I guess, called the FC2 National Fiction Competition in 1995, and that's how it got published. Since then, he has just self-published 2 books and a play. You just go to his website, Aurora, whatever, and you can get one of his other books. So, like, I got Flee, which is like 2013 or something, much shorter. And this apparently is a flood like hits a Massachusetts town and the residents flee. And that's all I know about it. But anyway, loved this book. It was my favorite read of the year overall. So I had to include it, even though it's not translated. But it does hit on a couple of those like same things where we have no idea who the author is, and he lives in Paris. So there you go. That kind of counts.
Sounds really interesting.
Now, and I should say that it was BookTube that turned me on to that. Like, so a Paper Bird. I don't know if you ever see his video. I mean, they're great, right? Like he has such a. It's like artistic stuff. I was going through and watching some Gaddis stuff in anticipation of rereading the Recognitions. And I really, really like Leaf by Leaf, but he goes super in depth and I didn't want to be spoiled. What I like about Paperbird is like, it's just kind of almost like a teaser trailer he does for books. So anyway, like one came up then about Evan Dara, like the autoplay stuff, the way that people turn into flat earthers. And so I was like, okay, like here's a author that's reclusive in a whole new way, which like is always interesting for whatever freaking reason, you know what I mean? So anyway, when I read it, it was like blew me away. So
awesome.
And I have like a 30-minute review up if anybody actually like wants to get into the nuts and bolts of it.
Is that the latest one?
It's not my latest. My latest one I talk about. Oh, my latest one I read the beginning, the author's note of The Diaries of Emilio Renzi by Riccardo Piglia, translated by Robert Kroll.
All right.
So
I might have watched it.
I
don't know if I could it, but I probably watched it then.
So back to translated literature is what I did on my latest one. So you'll be very proud. No, this one was before.
I'll actually have to watch it.
Exactly. No, the Lost Scrapbook video is when I was literally falling asleep. I had no plans to do one. I was very tired. I think you could see it in my eyes.
It was like 1 a.m. or something.
Say what?
It was like 1 a.m. you recorded that, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was 1 a.m. Very tired. And so, yeah. But the perfect way to record about that book, because it's a mind-altering book, so you should talk about it in a mind-altering way.
It's all part of the plan.
Sorry, Michael. This is translated.
Translated? Oh, no. I had a few lined up because I was sure people were going to talk about it, but because no one has yet, for hurricane season, Fernanda Monchor, translated by Sophie Hughes. I'm assuming both of you read that one.
I have, yeah.
We did a podcast on it.
Yes, I wasn't listening.
Was that our first conversation, or was no?
It was, yeah.
Was it? Okay. It was definitely our first.
Remember.
I think it was our first planned conversation, but we ended up doing a BTBA like reaction podcast.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. 2020 has been a weird year. But yeah, there is a podcast episode. Actually, I might convert this into a podcast episode. That'll be good. Save me having to record another one. But yeah, that book I still think about hurricane season and that town and what those women went through. I really need to read that again. I don't know what to say about it because I've done the podcast. I think everyone's read it, but it's definitely one of the best books I've read this year.
Yeah, I did that for my in real life book club, but we're not actually meeting in real life, nor do we almost
in real life anymore.
I do have a question. How did the people react to it?
Well, this was the original Weird Book Club, so we set the bar high earlier on. We read Come Madre, which was that was the favorite group read of the year for the group, so that should tell you something.
Yeah, because I was just imagining a group of old ladies.
These are friends that I've known, some of them since 5th grade, so we have a sense of each other's eccentricities. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to tell because we assigned it to ourselves in this very odd time. It was going through the American presidential election period, and so I read it 2 months apart from when I discussed it, and I remember the intensity of it. I remember how this whole the witches' house parties and there's something kind of Silence of the Lambs ish that was ringing bells for the descriptions of the life that you eventually find out the witches living. I don't want to give away. I don't want to spoil it too much.
Yeah,
we did the same thing on the podcast. We had to talk around.
It is hard to talk about spoiling.
I think a lot of it. I think a lot of the impact is it's kind of each narrator kind of calls into question certain facts that you thought established, and the insight into characters personal turmoil deepens, and you kind of start to understand a little bit more why they're doing what they're doing.
Chris is an all-time reader. Chris Olson's comments up there about hurricane season, he is a great source of. But one thing about the different narrators I really liked is each one brought to the table their own sort of definition of witch, and I want to go back and read it with that symbolic stuff in mind, because I actually think that it deserves a deeper dive even than I gave it when even though I was going to do a podcast like that. I do feel like this is a book that people will be talking about in 10, 15 years. It feels like a major work.
And probably if you're personally like torn between a life of homosexuality or bestiality, you would deeply relate to one of the characters in Hurricane Season.
Well,
it's a very conflicted.
Who was that director that did?
and the treatment of toxic adolescent masculinity is tremendous. I mean, probably the best treatment I can think of in a while, and like, it makes sense that it was an international hit because while it is a translated literature piece, it would not have mattered what country she was from, in my opinion, or where she had written it. Like, it was like so good. I think it's so kind of like timeless in its thematic quality that it would have worked. But yeah.
Well, we're all on record as being pro-witch, so that will come back to haunt us.
All right, what you got, Dan?
What do I have? Well, since we mentioned it earlier, I'm obligated to talk about breasts and eggs.
Yeah.
You are the expert.
It's duly translated, and I didn't write down the translators' names. Maybe someone could help me out.
Sam.
Is it David Boyd?
David Boyd and Sam someone.
And I only know because I think he's the guy who is in my home state.
Oh.
Who I have talked.
Yeah, Sam Bett and David Boyd.
So David Boyd, Dan, does the Factory and the Hole, that author whose name is escaping. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's Hiroko Kawakami, but I might be mistaken. There's two Kawakamis that we.
So he's actually we've talked before about like translators that follow. He's one of those translators that, like, if he's on it, I'm probably interested in reading. It's probably going to be pretty high quality Japanese fiction.
Yeah, and we were talking about before. Sorry,
Chris called it a downer.
Chris didn't like breasted eggs. I knew that.
A downer.
Yeah. I can't weigh in, but I do happen to know that he did not like that book.
I feel like Chris would be the expert in Japanese literature here, though.
I don't claim any expertise. I know that.
Hey, our bar is better than Murakami, and it is.
I think we talked about this a little bit before. I just think the Haruki Murakami connection was like so overstated to the actual similarities between them. I think it was kind of one of these books where they're trying to convey like this is a translated novel from Japanese that you should really care about, and there is some kind of connection between them and their like public personas, the authors, like because Breasts and Eggs was as we have received it is a much expanded novelized version of a short story, or like a kind of a novella that she won the Akutagawa Prize for, and that's like the big deal like serious literature prize in Japan. And so this is something she's like gone back and reworked a lot. And like, it's kind of funny because it's split into like two major sections. And the first chunk of it, it does feel like a novella, but I think it was, you can sense that there's like a lot of like thematic building that she got to do by like expanding it as much as she did.
I think the second half was better anyway, yeah.
Oh, really?
I think it gives it time to like kind of deepen the tension that exists. It gets way more existential in the second half for sure, or second chunk for sure, because like main like drama of it is the this woman who has finally achieved some professional success as a writer is a very strong drive. She wants to have a child, and all of the people around her are telling her, the very pragmatic reasons why she shouldn't. And also, she herself is asexual. She never uses that term, but the way it's
she doesn't want to have sex.
Right. And that further complicated, like it taught me all sorts of things about like the reproductive rights in Japan and how like unmarried women basically can't get artificially inseminated. Like you have to like prove an inability to conceive in order to have, so there's all these like sperm logistics that start going on in the book, like in a pretty serious way. Like, if we can't get it from an official medical source, how else can we get some sperm? But also in a way that, is...
Yeah, just ask random people on the street.
I mean, it kind of almost goes there. But then it gets into all these like existential questions of, or, in her own like personal and professional life, is this really the best thing for her? Would it be the best thing for the child? And like the depth in which it's like discussed whether or not it's ethical to like bring a new life into the world is like, I felt like it did the topic some like due justice. What is like kind of considered a neutral positive act in a lot of social contexts. And the arguments against it are like completely reasonable. Like that's one thing I really appreciated about the book, is that I think it was very much marketed as sort of something engaging with like feminist issues, like which could encompass like so many different things. And I think a lot of times when you read a book that's clearly engaging with like the current political structures, it can be really disappointing when that book is just like presents all of these like straw man arguments of like the evil, like the stupid conservative forces, dominant conservative forces, and then like give this really impassioned speech, and it's like the value. Anyway, and it's like it's not a real fight. It doesn't correspond to real life. It's engaging with real issues, but not in like a realistic way. It's in this very like good and evil, and if you have the most well-reasoned argument, then you will like prosper, and also people will see the light of your wisdom or whatever. I don't know. And that's not the way it happens. Like this really just this woman who on all accounts is like being questioned by people who are like fairly well-intentioned, and she just kind of has to like make up her mind and like decide how she's going to feel about it and why she wants to do what she wants to do. And I really appreciated that way more than just having some kind of like, feel good, like, oppressive argument. You're like, no, that's not right. Haha, I get to be pregnant now and feel good about it. It's, I don't know. It did it in an interesting way. It didn't feel like cheap to me. It earned its length of consideration.
I read that after Kim Jong born 1982, so that was a double of feminism going on there.
Yeah. There's a lot of bad stuff happening.
Yeah.
All right, Derek.
All right. George Perec, Life, the User's Manual. Translated from French by David Bellos. And this was another doorstop. And very, kind of like Lost Scrapbook. Like you don't know what's going on. It's highly experimental, and it's got more of, you can figure out what's going on a little quicker. But it also, though, does end in a way where everything is literally put together, and it's just incredible, So the story is all takes place in one apartment complex in Paris, and specifically, literally like 1 minute. But of course, in that minute, you go through each of the rooms and not only what's happening at that time, but also, their histories and the history of that family, the history of that room, the history of the owners of the complex. And there is throughout a really great plot and thread about a rich eccentric that it has traveled all over the world to every port to paint that port, and then he wraps up the painting. He ships it back to this Paris apartment complex, and a woodworker that lives there that he's hired, who makes puzzles, then makes a puzzle of his painting. And so when this rich eccentric man is done painting every port, he is going to come back and put together every puzzle. And for the end part of his life. And what I've just described, while the plot that goes throughout is also the structure of the novel, but that only makes sense like once you're kind of reading it. And then there is, in addition, another layer of chess when it comes to structure that I was not as good at picking up on, because I'm not really a chess person. Like, I know how to play, but I don't know the whatever. So it wasn't until after I finished the book that I read like some supplemental material and essays that showed how he did some things. So it's kind of cool to learn that there was a whole nother layer that if I chose to interact with it that way, I could. I really like that about these big maximalist books, because you as the reader get to kind of choose what your entry point. To me, this was just like some of the best writing on like everyday life, and it's very like you took this one world and you saw how much you could expand it out, and that's what I got out of it and loved it. And I read it right at the beginning of our sort of lockdown, or whatever you want to call it, and frankly when we took it a little more seriously, because at first here there was like a true lockdown, I feel like, and then when I made my video on that, which is like 40 minutes long or something, I did it room by room in the house, and so I had fun like mimicking that. That's definitely like, I mean, it's probably the most famous book I've read this year. I'll probably finish the recognitions by the end of the year, and that might be up there, but Perex is probably the most famous book. Why are you shaking your head? Oh God, you're right, Michael. Oh my Punishment. Crime and Punishment. Oh my God, that is amazing. Yes, 100%. That is not the most famous. Crime and Punishment is there. I didn't even put, when I was going through, there was a couple of books that I didn't pick out. Hurricane Season was one, because I figured you would have it. 4x4 was another, because I thought you might have it, but also because it doesn't. Just in case. You what? You did.
I have it there just in case you didn't mention it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I didn't bring that. But anyway, the other one was, I was like, well, I'm not going to talk Crime and Punishment, because we did that. We did a thing, and some of the classic books, like, it's not fair to the other books. You know what I mean? Like, it's not fair to be like, well, Dostoevsky's my favorite. Who was this that you like? You know what I mean? Like,
I didn't pick it because it was a reread for me.
Oh, so yeah, that's smart.
Doesn't count.
And it was a reread for me. So there we go. Yeah, correct. Though it was great. I mean, I think though that ties in. You can see those two in a row. That if you're like me and you like puzzles and you like kind of figuring out narratives as you go, those two are like the ones. Interesting that it's like with my first one, it was all kind of like plot and mood, and you know what I mean. So it kind of shows the two different ways I like to read.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I guess I'm up, but I'm trying to work out which one to pick. 4x4 was really good. I really enjoyed it.
I did too. The only reason I wouldn't pick it, and this is a really small nitpick, is that it feels a little bit like a short story, even though it has the length of a novel. Like, there is one tale, T-A-L-E. You know what I mean? Like, it's good, and it's a good one, but there's not a ton else going on.
Yeah, the one I think I'm going to pick is called The Dishwasher by Stephanie Leroux, translated by Pablo Strauss. And this is a French-Canadian book about set in Montreal, about 2000, early 2000s. It's just this guy who's a graphic design student, but it centers around his part-time job as a dishwasher in this fancy restaurant and his descent into drug addiction and, you know, having your first job where you're making money and just, oh, I've got money now so I can start buying lots of alcohol and buying all the drugs. And, like, that's pretty much the entire book. And then it's like his growing obsession with heavy metal music, like Iron Maiden and stuff like that. And it was just a lot of fun to read that kind of book. I don't know what's happening.
Derek, what happened? Did you pick up any new metal recommendations from the book?
No, a lot of them were obvious choices. They listed so many metal bands. Like, a lot of them I haven't listened to, a lot of them I've never heard of before, but I'm kind of stuck in my... I prefer the more punk, emo type metal stuff. So I'm still listening to the same albums. I don't know if you looked at like this Spotify list where it tells you, oh, these are your favorite songs of the year. It turned out I listened to my because they released earlier this year your forever favorites, which were like, oh, these are the songs you listen to over and over again since you had your account. And I've just been listening to that playlist all the time, so it didn't really tell me much except that I like Coheed and Cambria too much.
Classic.
I actually know The Dishwasher, that book, very well, but I have not read it. This is going to circle back to a conversation we were having at the beginning, but the reason I have not read it is because when I met my wife, I was 21 and I was a dishwasher. She was a line cook. So I was a dishwasher while I was like trying to do music and stuff like that for a couple of years. And I've tried a couple different times to write about that era and that whatever. And so I do not want to read a book called The Dishwasher and then realize that it's all already completely written and whatever. So.
Yeah, someone did it better than you.
Exactly, like far better. And yeah, I just don't. I'd really like to eke a short story out of the material before I go and read the much better novel.
Yeah, it's just a lot of fun to read that kind of book where it's just someone's life falling apart kind of thing.
See, yeah, also feels relatable. I can get down.
Like when you're 20, yeah.
All right,
Dan.
Okay. I think one that I really, really enjoyed this year was called Mama Day by Gloria Naylor. And I'd heard of this book. It kind of gets like passed around on lists of like sort of like literary fantasy, or I guess that would be kind of the bucket would be put into. But also there's another booktuber out there. I don't know her actual name, but the name of the channel is Books by Leynes, Leynes, and she just like got this very funny, deeply like very strong take on what she reads, and like thoroughly researched and incredibly put. So anyway, she's done a lot of Gloria Naylor reviews this past year, and Mama Day it kind of gets marketed as like a retelling of Shakespeare's The Tempest in a way, but it's one of those things where like I think they just kind of say that for marketing purposes. Like you can kind of read some of that into it, but to a very limited extent. Like it takes place on an island, and or a portion of the plot does. And it's kind of this interesting, like, freestanding political entity. It's like off the coast of the United States, but it doesn't belong to any particular state. So it falls into the sort of like gray area jurisdictionally. And there are all these kinds of like conventions and, local legends for how this population of like predominantly African, now not African American because they're not technically American, but kind of they are. So this like, there's a lot of like the traditional dynamics of like origin stories, going back to one's roots, figuring out about like both the very tragic and also kind of empowering things that like underlie where you came from. But it's, I don't know, it's one of those novels that really kind of skirts the boundary between, there are like supernatural elements to it, but they all kind of have something of a practical explanation as well. But also there's this very interesting like kind of cyclical structure to the way everything is set up. Like just the quality of the narration is this very like classic charismatic storyteller for large portions of it, but there are also all these sort of like intergenerational conflicts, and again like the sort of modernized younger characters and the more traditional older characters, like they both have they have well reasoned ideas behind why they do what they do, even though some of it is kind of fucked up and it's like that messy human stuff. But I don't know, it's just like someone who's like able to be very entertaining while also being like to strongly convey certain ideas and themes, but to also leave things very open-ended. And I think that's really hard to do. And you can't underrate entertainment value in our current environment. So this was like a favorite of someone that I sort of respected on YouTube, and it like totally lived up to the hype. And I would definitely want to read more of her novels, although I think this is the only one that has that sort of supernatural element to it. I think most of her other novels are very much almost more like Pareckian in that they like look at, there's one called The Women of Brewster Place, and it's all these different women living their different lives within this one particular apartment kind of thing. So anyway,
that sounds really good.
Yeah,
I haven't read. I've never read fantasy ever, which is,
I can't get into fantasy.
I've always wanted to get into one. I've always thought like, oh, when the right one comes along. But like, I have a similar thing with science fiction where I've read Dahlgren and Dune, and I think that might be it. I mean, books that have, I guess I've read Philip K. Dick. I guess that counts. All right, I've read some science fiction. I have not read fantasy though that I can even think of. I mean, so I don't know. I'd be interested in that.
It's a very light touch. It's like 90% realistic, and like I said, a lot of the stuff could be explained through pragmatic means.
Yeah.
It doesn't overplay. Yeah, actually, I find it easier to get into science fiction than fantasy as well, just because, like, at least in science fiction, it's presented as like, all the crazy solutions they come up with are stuff that you could potentially feasibly achieve in the real world if you had like way better technology and were way smart, whatever. But like with fantasy, it kind of gets into this like, how whenever there's like a big power struggle, it's like, well, why didn't you just like throw a lightning bolt at him? I don't know. It's all magic and nonsense. And so I don't know. Maybe you might. I guess like a lot of people would refer to this as sort of a magical realism, although I always feel very uncomfortable having the way that's like applied in a popular literature context these days. I always think of 100 Years of Solitude.
Yep.
And I think of like stuff that gets called magical realism these days is just like quirky. Yep. A lot of it very like comforting. affirmative messages. I don't know. And this book is not like a lot of it engages with like the struggles of being a real person in a very like well thought out way. So the stakes always feel appropriate, I guess. Yeah, I would definitely highly recommend.
Nice. All right, I'm gonna go. So that's oh, there we go. So this is Louis Sagazzi, a musical offering, translated by Fiona Petch, and this is a Charco Press title. So I don't read anything like this basically ever, because I'm not even sure if we can call this fiction. So the author, Louis Sagazzi, is like an art critic and professor. And the first book he wrote that was then translated was called Fireflies. But it followed kind of like 100-page art lecture, but then connecting it with things in real life and stuff like that. And I read it afterwards after this, and it's really good. But this one is far better, I think. So this one is sort of based around Glenn Gould's variations, like his version of the variations of Bach's Goldberg variations. And he uses that like structure and the story behind Bach creating this work to look at kind of music's place in our souls, for lack of like an uncheesy way to say it. I mean, and that connection that music can make that is kind of singular, in like ways that other art forms aren't able to do. And I think every art form can lay a claim to that in one way or another. I mean, obviously, like we're all kind of like addicted to literature, but it made me think about music, which is something obviously I love, like in a very different kind of way. Even though most of the musicians in here, I mean, I'm not a big Beatles fan. There's a lot of Beatles stuff in here. I don't listen to a lot of classical music. There's a lot of classical music, but it all comes together to be just about the way that we use art to make life a little bit better, and like I really liked that, in that it was, we talk about books of suffering, like this is like a nice book, like you feel good, like when you put it down, you feel like there are elements of humanity that are so precious and beautiful, and so definitely one of my favorites.
How dare you bring positivity to this discussion, Derek?
I promise that's my fourth. I promise you that you will all be able to predict my fifth, and I also will bring no positivity.
50 Shades of Grey.
Holy moly!
All right. Okay, last pick for me is going to be probably the first. I think it was the first book I read this year, called Older Brother by Maha Govine, and that was translated by Tina Kover. This is a book about Syrian people living in France. The father is a taxi driver. The older brother drives for Uber. So there's this conflict between the two. Like, his father thinks that he's losing his job because of Uber and stuff like that. And the main character, who's the younger brother, he actually is a nurse, and he wants to go to Syria to actually help the humanity efforts there. And there's just so many like layers going on, because the father is a communist and the brother is a bit right-winged, and there's just a lot of like in-family fighting and arguing happening all the time, which was so much fun to read.
Particularly relatable around the holiday season. Family conflict.
Yeah. And because they're Syrian in France, you've got that whole layer of how the world sees them, like how the French people see them. So there's like all these different things happening, all these different layers of the story. I don't know what's happening with Derek. But it was just such a fascinating book, and because it was translated by Tinakova, that was the main reason I wanted to read it. Because she does some great books.
Derek was trying not to be on camera for
Well, like sweet.
Yeah, exactly. Derek was just, listening while I was, just.
Well, there's no photographic evidence. Yeah, I understand.
Exactly.
Private activities.
So I was going to ask about her. She's one of my favorite Twitter followers. She's a fascinating translator. Like, her politics are amazing. I really, really like her, right? Like as a person. But have you watched their YouTube channel, the Translators Reading Aloud?
The Translator Aloud. Yeah, I have.
Yeah. I really.
Yeah. It's a good way to test out books and see if it's one you're going to want to buy.
Yeah. And I mean, I love readings. Like that's one thing that's been very few has been cool about, this, but the fact that there's so much Zoom readings and stuff is cool. I like hearing like the translators read the work. Frank Wynn has done a couple that are just like, they're awesome. But anyway, I love that channel.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard of that book before, so.
Just
right.
if you see a Tinakova book, just buy it.
Yeah.
Translation.
Pretty
much. You
see the name, you purchase the book. That's it.
That's it.
Sophie Hughes, that's another one. There's like 3 or 4 that are just,
Megan McDonald.
Yep.
We could just go forever just naming auto-buy translators.
Natasha Warner.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen her translate anything in a while. It's weird. Like
Invaders, you were just talking about.
Oh, she's Space Invaders. That's right. Yep. Yeah. Okay.
She's out there. She's doing
all
right. Yeah. She's going through the Bolaño archive.
That's kind of what I was wondering was, do they just have her, like add another desk? And every scrap of paper they find, they hand it to her, and she's got to make a book out of it.
Bolaño's child is writing new novels as we speak, and he's translating.
They did that with Dickens and got caught.
Really?
Charles Dickens. There were 2 serialized novels that came out after he died. And it was like the magazines or newspaper, I forget which one it was, that that ran them, and claimed that they were found or whatever by his estate, and they were complete fabrications or whatever. They had paid somebody to do it. I always thought that super interesting.
That's cool. I like a good scam, a literary grifter.
There's plenty of those.
Yeah. Well, my last book that I wanted to mention was Chelsea Girls by Eileen Miles. And I kept singing the Nico song to myself as I went through in my Chelsea Girls, doo-doo-doo-doo. But anyway, it's like one of those books that's kind of set in New York, young, artistic, queer groups of friends who are all trying to, find their artistic voice and also have sex with each other and not make each other mad at each other for having sex with other people that they like, kind of thing. But also it's a very autobiographical work from what I can tell. Miles did their own. Now, I guess at the time when it was written, Miles would have identified as a lesbian, but now they're non-binary. They them pronouns. So anyway, it's interesting. Like, queer history is sort of evolving before our eyes, and there's all this stuff coming out with all the TERF stuff online, and people are like, oh, they came out as either trans or non-binary. They're betraying. There are no lesbian or gay heroes anymore because they're all changing genders and not being the gender that they're supposed to be. Blah blah blah. So it's interesting to look at it and like still read this book, and it's still like very complicated and engaging and funny and upsetting. And it doesn't matter like that the artist has chosen to identify otherwise since then. It's just like not a big deal. But I mean, kind of one of the things that struck me about it was it in many ways it's like this very traditional like macho kind of charismatic asshole character. That there are so many like male dominated books that you see from that perspective that it becomes very tiresome. But there's this whole sort of like, there's a lot of background on her family dynamic like growing up in this working class family outside of Boston. And her father was the character's father was an alcoholic. And they had a very like deep admiration for him in certain ways, and his like projection of this sort of classic masculinity was one of the things that the main character finds so intriguing about him, or one of the aspects of his memory that continues on in their life. And so they moved to New York and are being out and non-heterosexual, and they have this like classic macho vibe to them themselves, and it comes along with all that baggage. Am I? You'd be surprised to learn I'm actually 75. I think it's kind of funny because I do get the sense, to your point, Chris, that it was like a very like it and now text. I mean, there's one, it's split into a bunch of vignettes and it jumps back and forth to different time periods. And there's like one talking about how they go on a road trip to Woodstock, and so there's all that particular time periodness of it. But in one of the ending sections where the book gets its name from, the main character is taking care of this like aging poet who is like a real New York poet, kind of a big deal, contemporary. A lot of like the beats are, but maybe more interesting than a lot of them because the beats aren't usually that interesting anymore. But anyway, so it does engage with that sort of like, there's the nowness, but there's like the where we're coming from-ness and maybe where we're going-ness of being a queer person. And just like, despite being pretty much an asshole, like the main character is like legitimately like really funny. And like you can kind of see why people go along with their whole deal so much as they do. And it has just like a lot of different styles to it. It can be very experimental, it can be more conventional. And I just, it still works. It still works. A timeless classic. That's my, all right. Someone else.
That was awesome. All right. I'm going to end this tonight with the EEG, which I've talked about every time that we've talked, the Dasodrendic. And this was translated by, I think it's Celia. Yeah, Celia Hawksworth. That was the thing that got me super into her this year, and it's probably the most exciting like author find of the year as far as how much stuff there is. And so then I followed it all the way through. I have one left, Tryst, which I've been like saving because I'm so excited about it. But Yeah, that was an awesome book.
It still blows my mind that you read that before Belladonna, even though maybe it totally worked.
It's better that way, and it's like hard to explain. You know what I mean? But it was almost like Belladonna was like this youth of this character that I already knew so well. You know what I mean? So like it really worked the other way around just as well, because like at the end of EEG, you know exactly where the character is at, like, you know, mentally, emotionally, everything else. But it was like tracing it backwards. You know what I mean? Like, so really, really good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing it's like super intense, dredging up the worst fascist crimes of recent history.
Yeah, I mean, there's 30 pages at one point of just like lists of you know, families and how many people. I love this right here. So in June 1940, Soviet tanks entered Riga. Life was not immediately turned upside down. During all wars, always and everywhere, people build niches, magic burrows in which they place their everyday lives, their mirages, their illusions, normality in order to survive. I mean, I love that. That's awesome. Like, even when war comes, there's people who just like go to the grocery store. Yeah.
I mean, the fact that she was able to do 2 novels of historical atrocities of just that one time period and that one region of the world really says a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it goes to say something about how when the hate is that strong, you know, the atrocities kind of pile up, and the world felt like a world that hated each other at that time. But anyway.
You succeeded in your original what you promised, Derek, which was to bring the happiness level.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, there's nothing nice about it.
It's fair.
We don't do nice.
This was awesome.
Well, it's one of the joys of 2020 has been starting to do these conversations. So thanks.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
It really
I
has.
guess if we have time before the end of the year, we should do one about our plans for next year. I think that'll be an interesting conversation. But, you know.
Yeah, that'd be good. I mean, good because we might have some buddy reads.
Fun reads.
Yeah. Oh. How far are you on the recognitions now, Derek?
I am. I just have this awesome new. I can't figure out where my camera is versus here. I'm probably off screen like half the time, or I think I'm off screen when I'm like dancing because anyway, I got this cool ass hand blown wooden bookmark. It's awesome, man. Anyway, I'm very happy. Okay, 500 on page 500, and we got this one is 925. So.
All right.
We've hit a very difficult middle that is not bringing me joy right now. So I'm hoping that ends soon and I can get back to liking the book.
You're in those Gaddis doldrums.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Are you planning to read any big books for the end of the year?
At the end of the year? Hell no. I'm solely arbitrarily reading like small things that I know I can get through in like a relatively quick fashion. Yeah, I want to. Anything in specific I do want to finish before the end of the year? I'm not sure anymore. I knew I wanted to do some Cesar Ira, and I read one of my not favorite ones by him called The Miracle Cures of Dr. Ira. We won't get into that, but he's got a lot of stuff too. They can't all be hits, you know.
Yeah.
They got a lot going for him. Yeah. Well, all right, gang. Until next time.
Later.
Later.